As Scott mentioned, today we're going to be talking about the one particular tool out of the Revit Express tools, but specifically this is going to be a series, just so you guys are all aware. This is going to be a 4-part series every Tuesday for the next 4 weeks today, included in that. We're going to be talking about how to clean up models using the Revit Express tools, and each one is going to build on each other. Today I'm going to talk about the base theory and some of the major issues, and I'll recap them each time, but we're going to be kind of covering how each of the tools fits into the workflow and how each one can kind of intercollaborate. And since I don't want to just bombard you with tons of information, we're going to kind of split it up, again, 4 different weeks. We're going to cover a number of tools. So let's first of all take a look at some of the issues that many of us experience when going through and working inside the Revit environment. Now, you might be a BIM manager. You might be a BIM user. I think this concept still applies to all of you across the board, and certainly give me feedback on that if you don't feel that's the case. That's fine. But I think that many of us experience issues when we're trying to manage standards and work within the Revit environment and kind of correct things that maybe have gone a little awry. You know, Revit itself doesn't have a whole lot of standards administration tools built into it, and so it can be kind of difficult to actually administer. A lot of the standards are simple to create, but since there's a lot of them and there's no real automated tools, again, it can be kind of tedious to get them all configured, since it has no tools for enforcing. So it doesn't have any tools for creation, really, nor for enforcing standards and batch. And tracking and managing these standards over time, just because there's no tools, it can be difficult. So we are all kind of experiencing this issue. We start a project, we've got a decent template, we start a project off, we get going, and then all of a sudden, a few weeks in, a few months in, whatever the case may be, depending on your project types, you start realizing, like, my goodness, some of these things have gotten a little out of control, and how do I rein this back in and kind of bring my project back into alignment with my standards, since there aren't a lot of really good tools to do that? Well, there are a couple of tools. They're just not necessarily built into Revit directly. So let's take a look at a few of these tools that can be used to kind of realign your projects with your standards. And check this out also. If your standards are evolving over time and you have active projects, that's even harder to track down. Because I mean, sometimes it's easy to get standards to go from one project to the next, but tracking which projects it's gone into and how it's changed over time and how that might have ramifications on other parts of your project, that can be tricky as well. So we're going to kind of try to address a lot of those. And if there's specific areas in your projects where you've experienced troubles in managing standards, certainly throw them into questions as we're going through the presentation today, and I'll try to address them either today or as we're going through the rest of the series, or throw it into comments at the very end as feedback. And in the next 3, and possibly we'll even extend this if there's enough feedback on this, we'll talk about how to handle some of those very specific issues with a few of the tools and just some of the out-of-the-box Revit tools as well. I mean, this whole point of these webinars is to help you out as a whole. So let's go take a look at some of the solutions that I'm going to propose specifically out of the Revit Express tools. So we do have a number of tools that can help in the process of managing projects in the first place and just kind of cleaning stuff up. We've got a tool called Project Cleaner on the Manager Suite. There's Shared Parameter Manager that can help get your parameters into alignment and get those all fixed up if those have gone a little squirrely over time. There's the Family Processor to go through actual family content and bring that in alignment with the actual shared parameters that have been modified. There's Batch Family Loader, which is a fantastic tool for taking a bunch of content that's been updated and loaded into a number of projects. There's Type Swapper, which can help with resolving inside the project some issues with different types, and we'll take a look at that tool eventually. There's Model Compare, which is actually a great tool for benchmarking and seeing where you're at right now. In fact, that's the tool that we're going to take a look at today, is the Model Compare tool and how this can work. And I'll talk about some of the theory of how Model Compare usually is used, but I'm also going to talk about sort of an out of the normal way of using Model Compare in today's example. And then there's Spreadsheet Link. You guys have probably seen me a lot of times use Spreadsheet Link to correct information and to kind of end batch, use Excel formulas to update some information. We'll be using that throughout this presentation as well in different ways to kind of correct some data. Of course, I'm a big fan of BIM lists because that helps me keep my standards in alignment as I'm going, but it also helps me bring standards back into alignment in some cases. And we'll take a look at another alternative way of leveraging BIM lists to do that. And then, of course, View Creator. Sometimes I just have to step back and reset in some cases, like recreate some of my views just to kind of ease in some of that view creation process. I like to use View Creator, and it can help me with that management process a little bit. And so we'll be talking about how each of these tools fits into the workflow throughout this 4-week series. For today, let's talk about Model Compare. Now, Model Compare is a tool that was originally built to actually compare one model to another as the model progresses. So if I am, say, an owner, if I'm a building owner and maybe I have prototypical buildings, maybe I'm Walmart or maybe I'm Target or I'm McDonald's or something like that, and I have a standard building that I work with, and I send it out to other outside architects regionally and engineers and have them do regional updates. When I get that model back, I can compare the differences in the two. Or maybe I'm an MEP engineer, and an architect is sending me regular updates to a model, and I want to see exactly what the changes are so I can see how it's going to affect my design and the elements that I have hosted this architecture model. I can use Model Compare for that process. And that's the typical reason why we originally built Model Compare, was to help solve those issues. But you know what? It's got a really good use in today's example here as well. So with Model Compare, what I can do is I can snapshot, I can take a capture of the information in an existing model or template. We oftentimes promote using a starter project file that actually has work sharing pre-enabled, links pre-created, it's got some directory structure pre-built and stuff like that. Well, I can snapshot that. I can know exactly what the settings are for the most part, for the vast majority of the information that I care about inside that template, that starter project file. I can also snapshot models that have been started from that template. So as projects get kicked off and they get going, I can take and snapshot those projects after a while, after they've been worked on for a bit. And then I can take and I can compare those two. I can see my template file, how it sits, how the starting point exists, and I can see what's happened since then, and not necessarily comparing things that have been created. I don't care about instances of walls and instances of doors in this case. What I care about potentially is settings within the walls, wall type information, door type information, which families have been loaded into my project over time. Are they modifying and changing the version of my room tag or my area tags or my VAV mechanical equipment tags? I can find this information out and see what's going on. I can also see if there's new text styles that are just manifesting inside my projects, and I can kind of see where they're being used and how many instances of those happen to exist. So I can start getting an image of what's going on inside my project file and start making a plan of attack as to how to bring it back into alignment. So today we're going to talk about capturing that information. How can I get it? How can I understand what I have right now based on where I want to be and where I am? So you can also use this, by the way, as a method for augmenting your active standards that are migrating and modifying over time. If I snapshot my template today, my starter project file today, and it progresses, I can snapshot it in the future as well and see what's changed between the two. That can also give me a really good idea of, you know, if I had a snapshot from template version 1 and I had a project start from that, but now I've got a snapshot of template version 2 or 3, I can actually see some steps that I might need to take in my projects that have been begun from previous template versions to see what's going on. So another very valid way of using the snapshot tool, the Model Compare tool. So without me talking too much through PowerPoint here, what I want to do is actually dig into this tool. I'm going to open up a model. I'm going to start the snapshot process, and we're going to, inside of Revit, kind of see what kind of information I can get back and forth and see kind of how this compares. Now this is a very simple project file that I'm about to take a look at. So it's not going to be a lot of divergence yet. Over the course of our series here, I'm going to generate and kind of manufacture more divergence in these, and we'll come back to this Model Compare and take a look at the different snapshots and kind of see what I need to do to correct some of the things that pop up. And again, some of those divergence might be coming from some of your feedback that you give me. So again, I very much value your feedback and want to make this workflow tuned to issues that you have had. Okay, so I'm in the Revit Express Tools right now. I'm in a project. This is a new building that's been started from my starter project template. In fact, let me open up my starter project template that I actually used for this. In this folder here, I used this a couple weeks ago. It's a basic starter project. What I'm going to do is just kind of not create a new local. I'm going to open it up directly and snapshot this file right here. So I'm going to open this up right now. And we'll create a snapshot real quick and just kind of show you what this process looks like. I'm going to use this model to create the snapshot because there's almost nothing in it, so the snapshot process is really quick. As a project progresses, if I was to create a snapshot in my active project model, one that's actually live right now, it might take about, you know, a minute and a half to create that. And instead of me talking for a minute and a half and seeing nothing happen, we're going to go ahead and just do a quick snapshot here and take a look more at the comparison side of this. So I'm going to go into Model Compare. This is one of our Project Suite tools. It's a part of the paid Project Suite here. But I'm going to use this. This means that every user out there, all of you who are managers or Revit users that don't have the Manager Suite, you all have access to the Model Compare tool, which is fantastic. So here with the Model Compare tool, the first step is to take a snapshot of your template. So I'm going to go ahead and do that right now. Take a snapshot. I'm going to save this in my folder here for project cleanup. Now I've already got a snapshot of this model. There's my starter project snapshot from a few days ago. Actually, it was in February. But what I'm going to do is make a snapshot right now of this same exact file, and we'll kind of play with this one here for just a little bit here. I'm going to go ahead and save that. And what it's going to do is get all the information it possibly can: families, types, instances of objects in the model, settings, information that we can actually go after with the programming interface. Now in this case, it just took a few seconds. Again, there's not a lot of instances, so it goes through the settings and the type data and gets that all very quickly. And this model is rather clean. There's very few types actually in here in the first place. But it gets that snapshot pretty quick. Now, right from here, I can go ahead and run my comparison. Since I've already got the snapshot of my active project model that was started based on this template. If I wanted to actually visually see some of the things that have changed, in fact, let's do this. Let's actually switch over there. I want to see some of those things that have changed. So I'm now in my office building, and I know that there's a few things that have changed that are visual as well, and I want to see where they are. I want to see what the differences are in some cases and maybe find out why a user might have made that change. So let's go back into Model Compare here. Normally what I would do is take a snapshot here again. Instead of us sitting here watching a snapshot get taken for a minute and a half, I'm going to go ahead and go directly to the comparison since I've already got one. So I'm going to make a new comparison. Now, if I completely wanted to Betty Crocker this presentation, I could have saved a previous comparison that I had run and just open it up. And it takes just a few seconds to open a comparison, which is great because in the future, after you've run a comparison, you've built one, you can save it and come back to it and continue using that over time as you're trying to correct your model, and you can stage different corrections that you have to go through and make. For now, though, today, since this is relatively small projects, I'm going to go ahead and make a brand new comparison. And I'm not comparing all that much right now anyway, so it'll be pretty easy. So I'm going to start out with this in the default configuration. By default, I'm going to browse to an old file. So let me close this down. This is the older project snapshot. For our purposes today, this older snapshot is going to represent our template, our starting point. So I'm going to browse for that. Now I just took this snapshot right here, this A15. That was taken, well, if I look at the date and timestamp right here, at 12:12 Central Time. So right now. I'll go ahead and use this as my starting point. So I'm going to use that. Then my newer snapshot over here, this is the one that of my project of maybe what's doing right now in time. I'm going to go ahead and browse for that one. So I've got some snapshots here. Let's see, I took one today, earlier today at about 10:55 Central. So maybe about 2 hours, an hour and a half ago. I'll use this one here as my, my example. I'm going to go ahead and open this up. So this has captured all of the new settings inside of it and instances as well. Now it's up to me to choose what it is exactly that I want to compare. Do I care about all of the new walls that have been drawn from the point that this was a template? Probably not. Do I care about any ductwork or conduit that's been drawn? No, probably not, because I don't care what they're drawing. I care how they've changed my settings for today's purposes. That's what I'm caring about. What views have they made? What levels have they made? Have they named them properly? Information like that. That's what I'm going to care about. So what I'm going to go through is actually, instead of comparing, first of all, I'm going to compare all the family categories. So I want to know all the types, all the categories, all the individual settings that could be tracked. For example, I want to know about, let's go look up here, I want to know about view settings that might be existing in my project, viewport settings that might exist. Have they made new viewports? Have they made new view titles? Have they loaded something new and that I wasn't aware of that I don't want them using? What are they doing with their wall types? That's information that I want to know. So this first column here talks about the categories of objects, the types of objects that can be defined. So these are most of my settings, the background actual standard settings that I've captured and I can compare. Now in some cases I do care about instances of objects. So I don't care about all of them or most of them. So I'm going to hit check none here. But as I scroll down here in this list, there are a few that I might care about. For example, let's take a look here. What do we have? I maybe do care about viewports. I do care about actual views that have been created, the actual views over here in my project browser. I care about those possibly. There might be other components inside here that I actually care about that users may have actually modeled or drawn that I might want to compare. Maybe Revit links. I maybe care about those. I can run comparisons on that and see if they've added new links or if they've changed paths or bound links or changed settings on them. I can find some information like that out and see if maybe if they keep doing this over time, maybe I wanted to make that change in my template so that this is done. Or maybe I want to find out why they keep making that change and maybe give some training as to why they shouldn't be making that particular change. Maybe they're used to a certain habit and they shouldn't be doing that. I can find out about that. Over here in my annotation categories, I'm going to go ahead and possibly do something like my levels. Maybe I care about the actual levels that have been drawn. I want to track that down. Maybe I care about the actual level head families that might be created or grid lines that might have been created outside of my traditional ones. Possibly I want to see what they're doing with things like my project base point if that's in this list. It might not be. Let's take a look. Is it in here? Property tags. Yeah, project base point's not in here. So I could probably get some information about some of the origin points and things like that. But for now, I think this will be fine for my current comparison. So we'll kind of use this for right now. I'm going to go ahead and tell it to run my comparison at this point. I can actually save these settings, by the way. So if I'm running different variations of settings for different needs and different uses, I can save these as my project standards comparison from my template to active projects for future use. And then I can load up later on project to project settings if I'm using model compare for other reasons. So nice little tools right there. So yeah, there was a question that just popped up about can settings in the new comparisons up here be saved? Yes, absolutely. I can save them right here and I can reload them for future use. So absolutely. All right, let's run this comparison here. I'm going to click OK. Getting this to kind of filter down to what you want is probably the hardest part of this process. And then it's not even all that hard. It's going to take you some understanding of what the comparisons actually mean and what they do and what information you want, where it's stored. So spend some time and look at that and kind of see how you might use this yourself to kind of get a comparison, to kind of get an idea of what's going on in your projects from your template to your active projects. So, all right. So this is actually running the comparison. It's actually doing some filtering right now of the snapshots and actually running the comparison side by side. This process here takes just a little bit of time. Give it a second here as it's running through. Once this is done, we're going to start taking a look at some of the changes that have happened from the template file to our current project. All right, so let's see what some of these differences are. In the general information here, we can see the file path has changed, and I expected that, right? I've got this original template folder where the original file was, and I've got a new saved path. That's expected. I've also got some new saved times. That would be expected as well. That's not a big deal. It's expected. I can see some information about versions. So if my template was originally snapshot and saved in 2014, and I'm upgrading now to 2015, there might be some things extra that I might want to do. That 2015 has new functionality, or 2016 now that it's out, there might be some new functionality. I can, of course, see project name differences here. So the original just says starter project, and my new project has an actual name and it has a project number associated to it. There might be some other information inside here that might be different, like the project status maybe gets updated over time and the issue dates and whatnot. But where I start getting really interested in this case is starting to look at the actual modeled objects. There used to be 10 out of what I've told it to compare, and now there's 47 objects out of what I told it to compare against. So this is all about what I'm comparing. There's actually a whole lot more than 47 modeled objects in my model, but I told it that I only wanted to compare things like views and levels and grids and those very finite objects. That's all it's going to actually give me counts on. It's not going to give me all this extra stuff of the 400 walls that exist in my project. It doesn't care about that because I didn't tell it to compare those. As far as annotation objects go, there used to be 5 and now there's 31. Again, I told it to compare grids and levels, I believe. So I've got 31 levels and grids basically total in my project at this point right now. As far as families go, I used to have 99. But since this model has progressed and people have been adding content and new types, there's now 236 family types that exist. That's meaningful to me. I can start tracking this and seeing what's new. So I can start seeing if there's crazy families that are being loaded in from outside sources or if they're my standards or whatever the case may be. Also, I can see that there used to be 7 views, and now there's 44 views. That's meaningful also. I can start tracking down and seeing what view names are being used and possibly what view templates are being associated to those views. There's a couple of other things like schedules, legends, and sheets that are untouched so far. There was a new group that was added. I might want to find out what that was. I can see specifically there's 25 new grids. There's 6 different levels, and I can actually expand out the levels here and find out what's going on. Interestingly enough, I used to have a basement level, a level 1, a level 2. Actually, it was called lower level, main level, parapet, roof, and second level. Those used to exist. You know, notice the coloring here? The red means that it doesn't exist in my new model. So somebody went through for whatever reason, and they deleted my old levels that used to exist there. And there's now some new levels in place that I have, like main level, lower level. Instead of using them, they erased them and redrew them from scratch. I don't know why, but this might be a great spot for me to go and take a look at you know, why users are deleting instead of editing. They may have had a good reason for it, but I can start investigating that and finding out what's going on there. So now there's a lot of other information that I can actually compare here. Maybe if they were moving these levels around, we actually do track the dimensions of where something is located. So instead of having deleted something, if somebody had modified it, if they moved this level around, it would actually have told me the old X, Y, and Z position of a level and the new X, Y, and Z position. Probably the Z is the more interesting one. It'll actually get on down to if they stretched a level, it'll tell me about what the old position was, start and end of the level, and what the new position is in X, Y, and Z space. So that might be interesting to you as well. See how users are augmenting and stretching some of the information, some of the extents, and you know, some of the other information like what type of data existed on there, who last owned it, what the actual name used to be and what it is now. So you can actually see if they are making changes instead of deleting things, you can actually see how they've changed. Now in this case, somebody deleted it instead of changing it, so I don't get a lot of that information right now because it was a delete and a recreation. But it's information that we are tracking as much as possible. So these elements here, again, these are just because there was a question that popped in and says, are they erased or edited? These specifically were erased. I can tell because it used to exist here and it now does not exist in my latest model. Whereas the levels that I do have did not exist before, but they do exist now. If there was an edit, these would have been colored in yellow, like these up here. It means that there's a change, that something is different between them. And I could have expanded this out. And again, underneath my identity data, I could have seen, for example, what the name was and what it is now, and what the physical position underneath dimensions was and what it is now. So I could actually see what the differences were between them if there was changes. And in the future, we can actually show that. We can actually show how something has changed if that's interesting to you. So again, leave me some feedback on that, and possibly I can show you some of that later on in a future comparison that we run with Model Compare. But for now, this was a complete replacement of levels. All of the old levels are gone, and all of the new levels were added in there for the current levels in my project. Now, what else has changed? So if I go here to my Elements tab, on my Elements tab, I can start seeing what has been augmented here. In my Families list, I can see, for example, Analytical Links, Analytical Nodes. Maybe those aren't interesting to me and my standards. I could actually have filtered those out if I didn't care about those when I was first building that new comparison, right? When I'm here in the process of building a brand new comparison, in this dialog box, I could have turned off some of those analytical objects over here on the family comparison side if I don't care what they are. Let me cancel that. I don't want to make a new one right now, but I could have filtered this down to get exactly what is interesting to me. Now, if I'm in the world of architecture, maybe I care about the doors. What's different than the doors? In fact, there weren't any doors before. There was no existing door types in my project at all. And now all of a sudden, they're using a whole bunch of new door types. And I can find out what they are. I can start seeing all the family names that have been loaded in. And I can start getting a plan together to see if they're my standard doors or if they're coming from some kind of outside source. Now, the same thing holds true for something like walls. Let's go take a look at walls, because there were some that were existing before and some that are here now. So if I take a look, there's actually a lot of new wall types in this list that are coming from some outside source. It's entirely possible that I might have taken a project over from an outside architecture firm or engineering firm, and I might have a bunch of their wall types in this mix. And maybe I don't want to have a bunch of their wall types in the mix here. Maybe I don't want their walls. So I can actually start putting together a plan for how I'm going to take their walls and swap them out for my walls and what walls are supposed to be. And I can start getting information sent off to the correct users because I can see exactly what's being used. And I can even start, going in there and start taking a look at some of the other information about these walls. What materials are at play? What's the construction information? I can start seeing some of that information about those walls. I can also see the walls that used to be there. In my case, I only give a couple of generic walls in my template. I can expand out these walls, and I can start seeing any of this information underneath, for example, this 8-inch generic wall. I can start seeing information that's changed. Again, remember I told you that the yellow meant that there was a change. It's not the same from the previous version. If I expand out this identity data here, there's actually, in this case, it's not all that interesting because what's changed is there was 4 new parameters that were added to these walls, and there's a couple of other, text unique ID parameters that were added as well because it got reloaded in from some kind of an outside source. So these were edited properties in some cases where there's some new parameters, and that made the identity data properties different from the original version of the wall to the new version. The name is the same, but there were some other added parameters here. In fact, if you've ever wondered where parameters come from in some cases, some people are like, hey, which object actually has grips on this particular parameter? Where is it coming from in my project? When I go to make a new schedule and I see this random parameter here, where's that coming from? We actually have a parameters tab here at the top as well. Depending on the objects that you're comparing, you might be able to go in there and find out what the parameters are associated to. So in this case, if I was wondering, for example, where, let's just see here. If I go into identity data properties, let's go identity data. If I go into here and I'm wondering which families are giving me this ADA compliance parameter, where is this parameter coming from? If I expand this out, this will list every single family. Oh, I just can't find a good view to show it to me. But it'll list every single family that actually is using that particular parameter. So in this case, this urinals WEUS, whatever this thing is right here, this particular family and type is using ADA compliance, and it tells me what type of value it is that happens to be a yes/no parameter. So I can find that in my project, and I can even now know what I need to do with this family possibly to correct that and make it align with whatever my standards happen to be. If I'm looking inside of here, there's a category parameter that shows up. And as I'm clicking on this, by the way, I have auto zoom turned on. I'm going to turn that off so it stops trying to zoom to different things in my project. Since I'm looking at type data and parameter data, it can't actually find a view to look at that because it's data. But there's a category parameter here, and for whatever reason, when somebody built these components on some of these floors, this FLR, CP1, CP2, and CP3, there is a parameter called category that applies to apparently ceilings, it applies to floors, it applies to walls, and a couple of other objects as well. Apparently it's quite a few objects, and in some cases it has a data value on it. Now I have absolutely no idea what this is here for. This is not a part of my standards, but I can go through now and find out the objects that are actually leveraging this, and I can make a plan potentially for how this is going to get added or removed from my project, or augmented in my active project out here. Or maybe I decide I like it and I want to see how it was added to these things. I can start investigating more about this category parameter and finding out what was done with that. It's probably a project parameter in this case because it's applying to system families as well. So I can start looking into that avenue, and I can also look as to where it might be used. Probably in filters is my guess for some visibility graphic controls. But it's kind of odd to me that that's there because it's not something that I added. It was something a user created, or maybe it came in from an outside source. Again, this might have been an inherited project from somebody else. So that parameters tab can be very nice and useful. Let me go back to the elements tab here because there's some other information here that might be interesting to you. If I collapse the families and I expand out like the annotation categories or the model categories, remember how I was talking earlier about links, how I have links pre-created in my template? I want to see potentially how those links have changed in my active project. So I can expand this out, and I can see that there's an electrical link, there's a mechanical plumbing link, and there's a structural link. So I still have 3 links. It's the same 3 links that I used to have before. I can see that there's something different about them, but they are the same links that I used to have. There's no new links that have been added. There's not something that was non-existing before that is now here. And they haven't taken and removed my links and replaced them with something else. That tells me that my users are probably working properly by using a reload from. So again, I can check to see if users in general are following my standards instead of removing them and basically destroying a lot of my view template settings. So if I expand this out, each one of these has some information that changed in the identity data. I'm wondering what that is now at this. Oh, you know what? When I took my snapshot the first time or this last time, I was the owner of it, And now I am no longer the owner because in this project I had relinquished control. So that's interesting that it actually tells you who the owner was even. It goes down into identity data and lets you know that type of information. Now that's not really all that interesting. It's not telling me that anybody reloaded anything yet. So at this point in this project, there's no change to the path. Otherwise, it would have let me know that. And in some cases, what you might see, for example, structural models, over time you might see them suddenly becoming room bounding. That's information that would show up in this list as that actually changes. It didn't happen to change in this iteration of the model, but it's something that could have changed, and I can investigate that and find that out, what the difference was. In the case of views, I can see if users are taking views that I gave them in the first place, and if they're erasing them, if they are creating brand new ones or just modifying settings on views. So in this case, there was a whole bunch of views that were added to this project, and I kind of expected that. The reason why they were added was because my template project has very few views. It has a site plan, it has some Navisworks views, and it has the 4 basic elevations, and that's it. So all of the remaining plan views that exist here, I expect all these to be brand new. Looking through this list, I can see some things that have changed. Something about those views have changed. There's some graphical updates here. That's because there's a new parameter that was added to them called view type that didn't exist before, but it does now. That's probably because of some standards that got brought in or something. Also, some dimensions have updated. In this case, there might be, for example, boundaries of views that have gotten stretched over time, and I can see what that happens to be if there was any changes to that. So I can now start seeing how those boundaries, the UV and potentially W mappings and sizes have updated. Now beyond that, there used to be a site plan here. It was called site plan. It was a floor plan, but it no longer exists. At some point, this site plan, the one that I gave them, got deleted. Now I don't know why exactly, but if I look through the rest of my list here, I can kind of maybe see if there's a new site plan that's been added. Yeah, there's a new site plan that was added called 01 site plan and 01 site plan existing. That didn't exist before, but it does now. Maybe whoever was building this project just went through and very rapidly used the view creator command and made some site plans and realized that there was an extra one they didn't need, and they deleted the one that I gave them. But I can find that out, right? That's information that I can now track, and I can see what's going on. Down here in my annotation categories, one more time, I was mentioning earlier here in the general information about some of the levels and the grids. I can get some more information about that if there's anything that's interesting here. Like, for example, had there been edits, I could get more information about the edits here than I would have on that previous tab. I can find out exact physical dimensions that have been modified, exact constraints of where things were physically located, actual text properties that existed on there for the view creator abbreviation property if anybody's modified that from one version to the next. I mean, I can find that kind of information out if there was changes. In this case, there wasn't because it was a straight up deletion, but in the future perhaps we start seeing those updates. And grid lines, I can see every single grid line that in this case was added to my project. My template doesn't have any, but there was a bunch of 25 grid lines, I believe was the number, that was added in, and I can start seeing exactly what the new values of those happen to be. And by the way, at this point right now, I have a snapshot of where this model is. So a month down the line, if the users are starting to experience all kinds of crazy problems, I can snapshot that model again, and I can run another comparison, and I can see why perhaps there's some new changes or some new errors or issues that might be happening in that particular model because I have a snapshot from it at this point that I can use to kind of base some kind of investigation off of to figure out why there might be some crazy problems. All right. I did notice a couple of questions that popped up. There was a question that said that somebody was interested in comparing revisions. So will it be indicated when an element moves position, but maybe doesn't change in physical size or parameters? And the answer is absolutely yes. It will let me know that. In fact, let's do a quick comparison here on some walls. I've already run a comparison once on this project, but if you're looking to see where physical objects have moved, like levels or walls, let's go take a look at that, and I'll actually snapshot this model right here. We'll run a new snapshot, and we're going to run a new comparison right now. So I'm going to go ahead and go to an elevation view here in this model that's live right now. I'm going to grab my roof level, and maybe I make this 56 feet. So we'll actually see this modify. It's going to stretch it up. It's going to make a couple of revisions here. Obviously, it's going to yell at me about this. All right, I can't do that one. Let's try something else, because that one, for whatever reason, I've got some constraints on the wall that made it angry. Let's take the level 4 here and move it up a little bit. Let's go 43 feet. See if this will be happy. Hopefully there's no other crazy constraints that's going to cause me some issues here. Let's see. And go. Okay, I'm going to delete the elements here that I couldn't create the sweep on. I don't care about that for the wall right now. Not super critical. So I've modified this level by 1 foot. Could have been anybody who did that. I don't know who did it. In my case today, obviously it was me. But I'm going to run a synchronize to central. I'm going to give up control of any borrowed elements. And I'm going to compact my central file, which is something that I like to do on a regular basis. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK here. Let's take a look here. Oh, you know what? I was going to move a wall as well, so I may as well make a modification to a wall. In fact, I've already made a modification to a lot of elements, but we're going to go ahead and make a physical plan move as well. So if I go here to my level 1 working floor plan, zoom in here, I'm going to grab a door. Let's just grab a door, and I'll move this over a little bit. So I'll move this guy up here a little ways, and I'll take this wall, and maybe I make this exactly 13 feet. I don't know. Make a quick modification there. So I've just modified this room a little bit. That actually has a lot of far-reaching changes beyond just me moving a wall. Suddenly, the square footage value of my room out here has been updated, and the square footage value of this room has changed. Its volume has changed. The door physical position, of course. The ceiling probably got updated as well when I made that change. So there's been a lot of changes that just happened because I made a one wall move. We'll actually be able to see that in the model compare if I compare those objects. So let me synchronize one more time, and we'll go ahead and grab a snapshot of this, and I'll take a look at some of the other questions that popped in. Oh, you know what? There's probably, I need to make another change here. There was another question. Since I'm right here, I may as well try this out. Somebody asked a question about, how about comparing the families? Say you load a new family type in, you have a snapshot at that point. Somebody makes a change to it. Maybe it's a room tag or a door tag or a piece of equipment or a strut, something like that. And then somebody makes modifications to the data within that. How does that show up? So let me take this piece of furniture right here. I'm going to edit this, and I'm going to change the actual width of this piece of furniture. It's a type property, so it's going to change quite a few desks. But I'm going to go ahead and make this, instead of 2'6", I'm going to make it 3 feet. So just a simple width change, and I'm going to click OK. And what it's going to do is modify this desk and every other desk in these rooms that are the same type of desk. It's going to make it a little bit deeper. Instead of 2'6", it's now 3 feet deep. Slightly larger desk. One more time, I'm going to sync to central and give up control of everything, and then we're going to go ahead and take that snapshot. So give it a second here as it saves. And let's go ahead and run model compare, and we're going to take a snapshot. Now keep in mind, this particular snapshot is going to take it a second more, or about a minute, to actually run, because it's going to have to get all kinds of instances as well, actual physical insertions of objects, possibly new text objects that exist, grabbing all the information about type data that we can possibly go after. So it's going to take it a little bit longer than it did. Remember when we'd snapshot the template, it took it like 5 seconds. We click snapshot and it was done, right? That's because there's almost nothing drawn. When there's actually content in the model, it takes it a lot longer because it has to go through every single instance and grab all of its properties and store that in the snapshot so you can use it for comparisons in the future. So your questions that popped in about physical objects that have been placed and their locations and their internal data and type information and reloaded families, all of that is information that we try to go after and track, and you'll start seeing some of that here in a moment as we actually run the comparison. And by the way, the more things that you actually compare, the longer that takes as well, because it's going to take all that individual information between the two and find out what the differences are. So that takes a little bit longer. It doesn't take all that long. It's certainly a lot faster than you trying to keep track of it manually, right? But it does take a little bit longer for that snapshot to actually get taken and the comparison to actually be run and compared between the two. All right, this is almost done here. Probably have another 30 seconds to wait. Keeping an eye over there on the questions, so if you guys have any questions still, feel free to throw them in there while we're waiting for this. So I don't have to just fill time by me jabbering on about nothing. Yeah. By the way, once we're done with this particular comparison, I'm probably going to be done with our presentation today. I don't want to keep you guys too long, but I do want you to think about other issues that you have had with managing your standards, and kind of give me some feedback on that. Start thinking about it now so that I can plan next week's presentation for you and include some of those in the next tools that we're actually going to be talking about. Again, this is a 4-part series, so definitely stay tuned for some of those updates. Oh yeah, I have one user who just asked a question here, joking a little bit about, does this work with the metric system? And the answer, of course, is absolutely. It's just comparing data back and forth. So your units of measure that you choose to use doesn't matter. That's totally up to you. So there was another question that just popped in here about if an error happened while taking a snapshot. For example, there's a common message that pops up during programming that says object reference not set to an instance of an object. If that message pops up, what happens? I typically don't get that particular error message, but if you do, if you for some reason get that message where it says something like object reference not set to an instance of an object, or you get some kind of other error and it won't take a snapshot, we want to know about that. We want to make sure that we can handle that. It might have been something quirky inside that model that we weren't expecting, or that was something that was maybe a little bit corrupted or something. Let us know about that. We will work with you to actually get model compare updated so that you can certainly take snapshots in those types of environments. So if you're experiencing that right now, I want to know about it. Give me a call, shoot me an email. We'll try and find out why that's happening so we can get it taken care of. But hopefully, or actually, one other thing that I noticed about this, when that particular message pops up, by the way, make sure that you're not opening your models detached. If you open up a model, if you do open it detached, that's fine, but save it someplace. You actually have to have a file name on a file so that model compare understands what's going on. So I just thought about that. I did this earlier today, and I opened detached and failed to actually save it. An unnamed file can't be used with the snapshot feature, the take snapshots. You have to save it. See if that takes care of your issue. Can you find the difference in linked files from version 1 to version 2 in your project? So if somebody has links in a file, they take a snapshot of that, and then they go into the next file, the next version in the future, and they snapshot that again. When you compare, does it tell you the differences? The answer is absolutely. It'll tell you the differences. It'll tell you, if the path has changed. Oh, wait a second here. I'll tell you. It's kind of a two-part answer, yes and no, because I think I understand what you're talking about there. Before I get into that, let me. I'm going to come back and retouch on that question. Let me start a new comparison here on these two models, so it can go through the process of comparing my previous version that I took earlier today. That's the one that I had on the right before. Now it's going to be my baseline, my earlier version of my model. And we're going to take a snapshot of the one that I just captured here at 1238. Notice the file sizes are about the same. There's not a lot of difference here. But I'm going to go ahead and take a snapshot, or take that snapshot and compare it as well. Now at this point, I'm actually going to compare everything between all of the models. I'm going to let it compare everything across the board. One thing I'm going to cut out, though, is I'm going to cut out the identity data option here. I don't care about who owned what, if there was any differences in the identity data. So I'm going to actually filter that one out. Where is it at here? Is it in my model compare objects? Nope. Oh, I'm sorry. It's over here in parameters. It's a parameter group identity data. I'm going to get rid of that one because I don't care about that. I don't care who owned what. So I'm going to exclude that from my list. But I'm going to compare everything else inside of here and tell it to go. All right. Now let me jump back over to the question that was asked a second ago while this is actually running a comparison and answer that one. So can I find the difference in linked files from architecture version 1 to architecture version 2 in my project? Or is it better to run these snapshots on the architecture files separately? Okay. Let me answer this as clearly as I can. If I'm in my model, if I'm, say, an electrical engineer or electrical contractor or mechanical, whatever, it doesn't matter, and I have somebody else's model linked into my file, when I snapshot my file, I get to find what's different about that link as it relates to my model. For example, what path was it last loaded from? Is it room bounding or not? Has it physically moved? Has it been pinned or unpinned? I can find that out. What work set was it on? That's information that I can compare back and forth, and I can compare both the type and instance work set. That's all stuff I can find out. But if I'm wanting to know what's inside that model, for example, have they drawn new walls? Have they drawn, and moved and erased ceilings and things like that? Well, for that, I have to open up their model and actually snapshot their model. So as I receive their model the first time, the first version, I would create a snapshot of that model as a part of my receiving process. And then as I receive the model the second time, I would snapshot it again. and I would start actually running a comparison on that and finding out what the differences were to see if they're doing, you know, crazy redesigns or deleting of objects and recreating them or changing fire ratings of walls or information like that. I can find that out, but I have to run that on their model as opposed to running it from mine. My model will just tell me how that link has been modified within my model, the link's actual settings, not the individual objects. Okay. So as it relates to managing revisions, when you want to do things like recalculating quantities, can you get a quantity takeoff out of this tool? Well, not necessarily. This tool isn't really designed for quantity takeoff. It's designed for telling you how objects have changed, not necessarily quantifying exact counts of objects and doing math in certain ways for surface areas and things like that. Now, you could use some of the information that you find out of this tool because all this information is able to be exported. Well, it is exported to XML in the first place, but you could also take the report, for example, and you could do some filtering because you can save this out to Excel by saving this report, and you could run some advanced, you know, queries on this and potentially get an estimate out of this. But that wasn't the original intent of the tool, and it's not going to be extremely easy to get that data. If you do use it for that and you find some clever, you know, methods of leveraging that for estimates, please let me know. I'd be interested in that. Because we do capture stuff like surface areas and every single instance is captured. I'm not usually showing it because I'm not showing you the differences or the things in the model that are exactly the same. I'm not showing equalities. I'm just showing differences and things that did not exist in either model or the other. So you could potentially get every single object in the model that we're capturing, that we're going after, and you could potentially run some kind of comparison against that and run, you know, some kind of estimate, but that wasn't the original intent. So line styles and line weights, are they redundant? Or they are redundant. Some people actually modified line styles and line weights in their template file, and in some cases they've modified them in families and information like that. Does this actually compare that? And the answer is, yeah, I believe so. In the comparison tool here, if I go to new comparison, I've already got one up here in the background, but if I go to a new comparison here, if I scroll down on this list and look up lines, I believe I have lines themselves, the actual existence of lines, which is the line styles. I don't know that we have line weights. Yeah, I'm not actually going after line weights, just the line styles themselves. So if line weights are interesting, let us know. And if it's something that you want to go after and we don't have it, if you find properties that aren't here, let us know. We have in every single one of our tools. Up here on the top left is the application menu for each of our tools, and there's a request feature option here. This is probably one of the best ways to get us feature requests. Pop this open, say, hey, I would like to get blah, blah, blah out of model compare, and I'm not actually seeing it. Is this something that you can add? And we can definitely go after it and see if it's something we can find, and if it's not, we'll let you know, and if it is, we'll probably add it in the near future if we can. Okay, text styles, dimension styles, yes, we go after those as much as we can. There was another question asked about limits on file sizes. Some of you have some very large files, and actually, quite honestly, I have yet to see a file size that Model Compare can't handle. I'd like to see if you actually get a file that Model Compare can't handle just because it's too large. We'd like to run some tests on that if we may, because we have yet to find models that are too large for Model Compare. It might take it a while, right? It might spin for a while it goes after all those objects inside that model, but it'll get the snapshot, and you'll be able to run comparisons on them. So you should absolutely be able to leverage that. Is there actually a way to visualize the changes between the models using something like view filters? Well, actually, I'm going to show you that right now because I've made a physical change here, and we're going to take a look at how you can actually see a little bit about that physical difference and physical change. Now, I can't see the old version of what it looked like unless I have the old model open. What I can see is that object and where it is in the current model, but I don't have a way yet of actually representing the old version of that, like with a grayscale or like an existing something, because that object doesn't exist here. I'd have to actually create it, and that might augment the model further, and you might not want that. So if you do have some ideas about how you'd like to see old versions, like compared side by side, that would be interesting to us if you have some ideas about that. But let's take a look at what's changed now. So last saved, of course, there was a last saved date and time. It was 12:55 of today, and now it was last saved at 12:38. That's this active model that I'm working in right here. There used to be 4,589 objects, and there's now 4,588 objects. Why is there one less? So remember that message when I moved that level where it said I couldn't handle that wall sweep and it was going to delete the wall sweep? Yep, it picked up on that, and there's actually a missing wall sweep now that doesn't exist here anymore. We'll be able to find that in a moment. Everything else here is all the same. Actually, it's not all the same. The level here is actually modified. So this level right here, something is different about it. If I expand out this level underneath the constraints of that level, you'll notice the elevation used to be 42 feet, and now it's 43 feet. So very specifically, I can tell that information. I can also find out what level that was. So if I go here to like the other information, I can see that was the, which one was it? Dimensions? Where is that information? I have no idea. It's one of those levels. Well, let me find out which one it was. Let me auto zoom to this thing and auto select that level. So when I actually click on this particular level right here, what it should do is try and zoom to it if it can find a good view. And in this case, it's not finding me an elevation view. Oh, actually, I'm on the general information tab. It doesn't zoom from here. Let's go to elements. Let's actually expand out those annotation elements here. Let's go to levels. I'm seeing a difference here in the elevation of one of these levels. If I click on this level, what it should do is find me a view, zoom into that particular level and select it, and select all the objects that are associated with that. So in this case, it's actually doing that. That level has updated. And I can see a number of objects being selected because their level elevation has actually changed to this new position right here. If I go to model categories, recall that wall that I moved? If I expand this down here, there's been some changes between these models. If I expand this out, some physical dimensions have updated in some form. Oh, look at this. All these walls whose heights are now different. They used to be 50 feet. Now they're 51. That's in the maximum position there of the Z bounding box. And the minimum Z here used to be at 45 feet. Now it's at 46 feet. Everything moved up a foot because of that change. If I scroll down here, there's some interior walls that updated. Let's see if there's any of these on my level 1 that I can find. Dimensions, again, all their physical dimensions have changed. All right, in this case, this is one of those walls that I actually moved physically. The length is updated from 4'11". It's probably that little angled wall. 4'11" 3/8 now to 5'7". It has a new cubic foot volume right there because the length is actually longer. The minimum maximum bounding box there is modified. The area, the plan area of that wall or surface area of that wall is updated as well. So I'm actually seeing some of those physical changes out here after that wall has been moved a little bit. In this case, this is probably that horizontal wall where it was 16'5" and now it's 16 feet. And I can see the actual physical position in the X, Y, and Z of that particular wall, how that's been modified. If I click on this wall, it'll actually zoom me into it, in this case in the elevation view. I'm actually seeing it in elevation. If I was to go back here to my working plan view and I click on this wall, let me click on this other wall over here. What it'll do is zoom into that. So I don't have to speculate about which wall that is. When I click on that wall, it actually is going to highlight the wall and zoom to it here on screen. So I can start seeing which wall specifically that was. This is, in fact, that wall that I physically moved. And then the one that got longer over here, that is specifically that wall that's stretched. That's this wall over here. As I click on, well, I'm not going to auto zoom anymore. I'm just going to have it selected. So as I switch away, grab this other wall. Okay, you're still zooming. Stop that. It will actually select that particular wall over there for me. So it lets me know that that's the wall that was being modified, right? So then there was a question that popped up and said, can I make changes to this information while I'm in this comparison? Well, I can make changes to the walls while I'm in Revit, but it doesn't reflect here until after I take a snapshot. See, the snapshot here is a second file outside of Revit. It's completely detached from my models. If I made a change to this, it wouldn't have any ability to come back in here and round trip into this model. It's not like Spreadsheet Link where I can actually take information out and bring it back in. So this isn't designed to be a modify and apply back to my model system. It's designed to be a snapshot in time as a report telling you what the differences are so you have the ability to respond to that in some form or fashion. If you want to make changes, you want to do that directly within Revit or using a tool up here on the Express Tools called Spreadsheet Link, where you can actually get that information, pull it out to an outside file, modify it, and round trip it. But that's not the intent of the model compare tool. It's not really designed for round tripping. There was a question there, can I make one of these comparisons on a new central model? Absolutely, I can snapshot any file that exists, any Revit project model that exists. I can snapshot it, whether it be work sharing enabled or not, whether it be new or old, I can start gaining these snapshots. Now the issue, of course, is going to be if you snapshot two dissimilar files that don't have anything common between them. They started from two completely different templates. They went down two different directional paths. They never talked to each other. If I snapshot those two and compare them, everything is different between the two because the element IDs are completely unique. You have to have some kind of common starting ground for the model compare to be able to compare two files what their standards are. Now, if these two divergent models that started from maybe a similar template file, there's at least some commonality there that I can actually compare as far as the standards go. But it's important to understand that this is designed to compare what was and what is now here and how that information has changed. But there has to be something that's similar between them in some form to be able to make that a possibility. Could I run Revit, Spreadsheet Link, and the Model Compare tool all at the same time? Well, technically I can. Model Compare is sort of a standalone tool. I can float this outside of Revit. It doesn't actually have to exist within the Revit window necessarily. So I can have Spreadsheet Link open and I can start getting some settings configured and start making some modifications to stuff while I have the Model Compare tool up in the background. However, when Spreadsheet Link opens, it doesn't have the ability for me to go back here and grab the Model Compare window. In fact, you might be able to hear in the background as I'm clicking on this, my computer's dinging at me because I can't go grab that background window. Spreadsheet Link is not what's called modeless, meaning I can grab stuff out here in the background. I'd have to save my settings, so I can go in here and make some changes, save my settings, maybe to my project, for example, shut down Spreadsheet Link, go to my next area of my comparison here and make some additional changes. I could then reopen up Spreadsheet Link. I could load my settings from my project or a file, and I could continue to make additional changes based on what I'm seeing here on the background window of Model Compare. Or I could pull Model Compare off to a second monitor and kind of start seeing what's going on there. But Spreadsheet Link itself doesn't have the ability for me to edit something out in the building space out in the model itself while it's open. So I have to kind of use Spreadsheet Link exclusively, even though Model Compare happens to be opened up in the background here. All right. Let's see. What else can we talk about here? There's one more question that popped in here. Can this Model Compare information be made into a .rvt file? So if something goes completely nuts and maybe one of your model files becomes crazy corrupt, can this information be turned back into a model? The answer is unfortunately no. This XML information here isn't like a GBXML file or like a land XML file that actually has surface data in it and wall information in it. This is just a snapshot of information. It's data that we're going after for the ability to compare, but we don't get everything. There's certain things the API doesn't give us access to, and because it doesn't give us access to it, we can't actually do anything about that. We can't actually create information we don't have. Whereas if you were to go through something like the application menu here and export your model out as like a GBXML file, or like an IFC even. IFC actually stores information about a project and it can recreate it. But even that loses some fidelity when you go out of one file format to another because you just can't keep all that information. So unfortunately, no, this does not actually recreate. Again, the whole point of Model Compare is to get the changes and try to understand what those changes mean and how that affects your workflow. So with that, for today's webinar, we're going to go ahead and wrap it up now. And again, join us next week on Tuesday, because on Tuesday next week, we're going to start talking about a few other tools and how to respond to some of these changes we're seeing here. Again, we really value your feedback, so give us some feedback about some issues you've run into and some things you might want to see, and we'll definitely try and handle those in the upcoming webinars.